The red emergency lights flickered on and off, painting everything in scary shadows. Captain Kethva's eyes opened slowly inside his emergency sleep pod. His body hurt everywhere as he tried to sit up. Something was very wrong. He looked around. The bridge of his cargo ship, the silent current, and his heart sank. 12 of his crew members were slumped over their control panels, completely still. They weren't sleeping. They were dead. The radiation storm that hit them 3 weeks ago had killed everyone except him. Kethva had 4 arms like all Valerians, but right now they were shaking badly. His blue skin, which should have been bright and healthy, looked dull and sick. Dark spots were appearing all over his scales, the first signs that the deadly radiation was slowly killing him too. The ship was floating helplessly in the empty darkness between star systems. No power in the engines, no working radio to call for help, just cold, silent metal drifting through space like a tomb. He pulled himself up from the pod, his legs barely able to hold his weight. Every step toward the captain's chair felt like climbing a mountain. His breathing was heavy and painful. The radiation sickness was getting worse by the hour. When he finally reached his chair, Kethvar's hands were shaking so much he could barely press the record button. He knew this might be the last message anyone would ever hear from the silent current. His voice cracked as he began to speak. "Captain's log, day 21 after the storm hit us. I'm the only one left alive on the silent current. My entire crew is gone." He paused, looking at the bodies of his friends and colleagues. "If someone out there picks up this message, please listen carefully. Stay away from the Kepler Nebula route. Don't use it no matter what the shipping companies tell you." His voice got stronger as anger mixed with his sadness. "The space charts are lying. They say it's safe, but it's not. The solar storms here are killers. They're 10 times stronger than what the maps show. My crew trusted those charts, and now they're all dead because of it." Kethvar coughed, tasting blood in his mouth. The radiation was eating him alive from the inside. "I don't know how much time I have left. The life support systems are failing. Food makers are broken. Even if I could fix the engines, I don't have enough fuel to reach the nearest station." He looked out at the stars through the cracked window of the bridge. Space looked so beautiful and peaceful from here, but he knew it was actually the most dangerous place in the universe. One small mistake, one equipment failure, one bad storm, and you were dead. "I'm going to keep recording these logs for as long as I can. Maybe someone will find this ship someday and learn from our mistake. Don't trust the safe routes, check everything twice, and never ever go through the Kepler Nebula." The recording ended, and Kethvar sat back in his chair, surrounded by the bodies of his dead crew and the endless, silent darkness of space. Days turned into weeks, and weeks felt like years. Kethvar was completely alone on his dying ship, watching everything slowly fall apart around him. The silence was the worst part. No voices, no laughter, no friendly conversations during mealtimes, just the constant hum of failing machines, and his own breathing. His food makers had broken down completely after the first week. Now he was eating emergency food bars that tasted like chewing on metal rocks. Each bite made him want to throw up, but he forced himself to eat anyway. He was down to his last few bars, and after that there would be nothing left. The ship itself was falling apart too. Small space rocks kept hitting the outside walls, making loud banging sounds that echoed through the empty hallways. Each hit sounded like someone knocking on a coffin lid. The metal walls were getting weaker with every impact, and Kethvar could hear them creaking and groaning like an old house in a storm, but the physical pain wasn't the worst part. Valerians like Kethvar could read each other's thoughts and feelings. It was like having a constant warm connection with everyone around you. On a normal day, he could feel his crew's happiness, their jokes, their worries, their friendship. It made space travel feel less lonely and scary. Now that gift had become a curse. Where his crew's thoughts used to be, there was just empty darkness. It felt like having a huge hole torn in his mind. The silence in his head was louder than any scream. He kept reaching out with his thoughts, hoping to find someone, anyone, but there was nothing. Just cold, empty space where warm minds used to be. Sleep was no escape either. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw their faces during those final moments when the radiation hit. He remembered how they had looked at him with trust, believing he could save them. He saw the fear in their eyes as they realized they were dying. Worst of all, he dreamed about their families back home, still waiting for a ship that would never return. The life support systems were getting worse every day. The lights would flicker on and off randomly. Sometimes the air would stop moving for a few scary seconds before the fans kicked back in. The machines that cleaned his air and water were making strange noises, like they were struggling to keep working. Kethvar knew he was running out of time. Maybe 3 days, maybe 4 if he was lucky. The recycling units that kept his air breathable were almost completely broken. Soon they would stop working entirely, and he would slowly suffocate in his own ship. He spent his days trying to fix things with broken tools and spare parts, but nothing worked for long. Everything was too damaged. He was just one person trying to do the work of 12, and he was getting weaker every hour. The universe felt impossibly big and empty, and he felt impossibly small and forgotten. Kethvar was lying on the bridge floor, too weak to sit in his chair anymore when something incredible happened. His broken sensor screen suddenly beeped. After weeks of silence, it had found something out there in the darkness. He crawled over to the screen, his heart beating fast with excitement. There, just a few miles away, was a big metal object floating in space. It looked like a space station or maybe even a rescue ship. For the first time in weeks, Kethvar felt hope flooding through his dying body. "This is it," he whispered to himself. "Someone's finally come to save me." With shaking hands, he fired up the last bit of fuel his ship had left. The engines coughed and sputtered like an old car trying to start, but they worked. Slowly, very slowly, his ship began moving toward the mysterious object. As he got closer, Kethvar could see it was definitely a spacecraft. It was big, maybe even bigger than his own cargo ship. His imagination ran wild with possibilities. Maybe it was a rescue vessel that had been looking for him. Maybe it was a trading post where he could get help and supplies. Maybe there were people inside who could fix his ship and save his life. The object grew larger and larger on his screen. Kethvar pressed his face against the window, trying to see more details. But as the shape became clearer, his excitement started turning into confusion. Something didn't look right. The ship wasn't moving, it wasn't sending any signals, and parts of it looked twisted. When he finally got close enough to see clearly, Kethvar's heart sank like a stone. This wasn't a rescue ship at all, it was a wreck. The hull was cracked open like a broken egg, with pieces of metal floating all around it. Cargo containers were scattered everywhere, spinning slowly in the darkness. But the worst part came when he read the name painted on the side of the broken ship, Star Wanderer. He knew that name. It was another Valerian cargo ship that had gone missing 8 months ago. Everyone back home thought it had been attacked by pirates or hit by an asteroid. Nobody knew it had died right here, in the same deadly space that was killing him now. Kethvar used his ship's weak scanner to look at all the floating debris. What he found made him sick to his stomach. There were pieces from at least 3 other ships mixed in with the wreckage. 3 other crews had died here just like his crew had died, just like he was about to die. The truth hit him like a punch in the face. His government had been lying to everyone. They knew this route was dangerous, they knew ships were disappearing, but they kept sending cargo vessels through here anyway because it was faster and made them more money. All those crews, all those families destroyed, just so some rich politicians could save a few days on shipping schedules. Kethvar felt anger burning in his chest, hotter than the radiation sickness eating him alive. "They killed us all," he said out loud, his voice echoing in the empty bridge. "They knew and they sent us here to die anyway." Now he was just another victim, floating in a graveyard that nobody would ever find. Kethvar sat in front of the self-destruct panel, his finger hovering over the red button. He had made up his mind. Better to die quickly in an explosion than slowly choking on his own poisoned air. At least this way, it would be over in seconds instead of hours. He closed his eyes and started to press down when suddenly the bridge filled with crackling sounds. His broken radio, which had been dead for weeks, was making noise. Static and beeping sounds came from the speakers, getting louder and clearer by the second. What the hell? Kethvar pulled his hand back from the button and crawled over to the communications panel. The lights were flashing like crazy. showing that something was definitely out there trying to talk to him. But this wasn't like any signal he had ever heard before. Most space communications were clean and digital, like computer data. This sounded old-fashioned, like the ancient radio waves his grandfather used to tell stories about. It was messy and full of static, but there was definitely a pattern to it. The signal was coming from the edge of the galaxy, from a place where no one lived. The star maps showed nothing out there except empty space and maybe some dead planets. No space stations. No colonies, no trading posts. Nothing. Kethavar listened carefully to the strange sounds. Hidden in all the static and noise, he could hear what sounded like voices. Real voices, not computer-generated messages. They were speaking fast, in a language he had never heard before. The words had a musical quality to them, rising and falling. Like a song. "Who are you?" he whispered to the radio, even though he knew they couldn't hear him. His own communications were too broken to send anything back. The signal kept getting stronger, which meant whoever was sending it was getting closer. Kethavar's heart started beating faster. In all his years of space travel, he had never encountered an unknown species. The galaxy was well mapped, and every intelligent race was part of the big Galactic Confederation. Everyone knew everyone else. But these voices didn't sound like any species he knew. They didn't sound like the deep rumbles of the Thorak people, or the high whistles of the bird-like avians. They sounded completely different, completely new. His sensor screen started beeping, and Kethavar looked at it with amazement. Something huge was appearing on the edge of his scanner range. A ship, but not like any ship he had ever seen. It was massive, maybe 3 times the size of his cargo vessel, but it looked crude and industrial. No smooth curves or elegant designs like Confederation ships. This thing looked like it had been built by someone who cared more about function than beauty. The ship was moving fast, much faster than should be possible for something so big, and it was heading straight for him. Kethavar felt a mixture of fear and excitement. After weeks of being completely alone, knowing he was about to die, something impossible was happening. Someone was coming for him. Someone from outside the known galaxy. Someone who shouldn't exist. The voices on the radio got clearer, and now he could hear what sounded like excitement in their tones. They had found him. He wasn't going to die alone after all. The massive ship moved through space like a giant metal whale, slow but powerful. Kethavar pressed his face against the cracked window of his bridge, watching in amazement as the strange vessel got closer and closer. It didn't look pretty like the sleek ships from his home world. Instead, it looked tough and practical, like it was built to survive anything space could throw at it. The ship was covered in thick armor plating and had huge engines that glowed bright blue. Strange symbols and markings covered its hull, written in a language Kethavar had never seen before. It looked ancient and modern at the same time, like someone had taken old technology and made it work better than it should. As the ship got closer, Kethavar could see small figures moving around on its surface. They were wearing thick white suits and carrying tools, working on something near the docking bay. Even from a distance, he could tell they moved differently than any species he knew. They seemed smaller than most galactic races, but they moved with confidence and purpose. Then, something incredible happened. A small section of the ship opened up, and a group of these beings began floating through space toward his own ship. They weren't using fancy teleportation or anti-grav platforms like advanced civilizations usually did. Instead, they had simple jetpacks and were connected to their ship by long safety cables. Kethavar's heart was pounding as he watched them attach some kind of docking tube to his airlock. His ship shook slightly as the connection was made, and then he heard sounds he hadn't heard in weeks. The mechanical clicking and whooshing of an airlock opening. He dragged himself toward the airlock door, his weak legs barely able to carry him. When the inner door finally opened, Kethavar came face to face with the most unusual beings he had ever seen. They stood on just 2 legs instead of 4 like him. Their bodies were smaller and more compact, but they moved with quick, efficient motions. Most strange of all, they had 5 fingers on each hand instead of the 3 or 4 that most species had, and their faces were covered by clear glass helmets that let him see their features underneath. The one in front seemed to be their leader. Her suit had symbols that looked like they might be her rank and name. She was smaller than the others, with dark hair visible through her helmet and eyes that looked kind but alert. She held up both hands with her palms facing him, which somehow felt like a peaceful greeting, even though he'd never seen the gesture before. What happened next surprised him most of all. Without any translation equipment or universal communicators, she began looking him over like a doctor would. Her movements were gentle but sure, as she checked his pulse and looked at the radiation spots on his skin. She spoke to her companions in their musical language, pointing at his injuries and at the failing systems around them. Even though they couldn't understand each other's words, Kethvar could tell she was worried about his condition. These strangers, whoever they were, seemed to actually care about whether he lived or died. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't alone anymore. The leader pulled out a flat electronic pad and started drawing simple pictures on it. First, she drew a circle with smaller circles around it, obviously a star system. Then she pointed to herself and her team and drew stick figures standing on one of the planets. She wrote strange symbols next to it that looked like Earth. Kethvar understood immediately. These beings came from a planet called Earth, but when she showed him more drawings of their galaxy, he realized something incredible. Their home world was way out on the edge of known space in a region that all the star charts marked as empty. She pointed to herself and wrote Commander H. Jin on the pad. Then she pointed to her companions. The bigger male with broad shoulders was Chief K. Park, and the smaller one with gentle eyes was Dr. S. Kim. They called themselves humans, and they were unlike anything in the galactic databases. What happened next blew Kethvar's mind completely. Chief Park walked over to his broken life support systems and started examining them like he was some kind of master engineer, but his tools looked ancient compared to standard galactic equipment. Instead of fancy energy scanners, he used simple, mechanical devices that looked like they belonged in a museum. Park opened up Kethvar's main air recycling unit and started making disgusted noises at what he found inside. The radiation had fried most of the delicate circuits, and toxic buildup was clogging the filters. Any normal engineer would have declared it unfixable, but Park just rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He pulled components from his own ship's systems, actual pieces of their life support, and started connecting them to Kethvar's broken equipment. The technologies shouldn't have been compatible at all. They were from completely different worlds, built by different species using different principles, yet somehow Park made it work. He used metal wire, chemical paste, and what looked like simple magnets to bridge the gap between the systems. Within an hour, Kethvar's air was cleaner than it had been in weeks. The human had essentially performed mechanical magic. Meanwhile, Dr. Kim was examining Kethvar's radiation sickness. She took small samples of his blood and ran them through a portable device that looked incredibly basic compared to standard medical equipment. But somehow her readings were more accurate than his ship's automated medical bay had ever been. Kim mixed together simple chemical compounds in small bottles, creating medicines that looked like they came from a primitive laboratory. When she injected the mixture into Kethvar's arm, he immediately felt better. The burning sensation under his skin started to fade, and his strength began returning. The most amazing part was how casually the humans risked their own safety to help him. Park had taken critical parts from their own ship, meaning if something went wrong they might not make it home. Kim had used up valuable medical supplies that they might need for their own crew. When Kethvar tried to show his concern about this, through gestures, Commander Jin just smiled and patted his shoulder. Through more drawings, she showed him that helping others was simply what humans did. It wasn't a burden or a sacrifice, it was just their nature. These people were extraordinary. Over the next few hours, Kethvar and the humans slowly figured out how to talk to each other. They used simple math problems, basic drawings, and lots of pointing and gesturing. It was like playing the galaxy's most important guessing game. Commander Jin drew a timeline on her tablet, showing Kethvar something that shocked him to his core. These humans had only been traveling between stars for about 50 years. 50 years. That was nothing in galactic terms. Most civilizations took thousands of years to develop safe interstellar travel, but what really amazed him was what they didn't know. When he drew pictures of the Galactic Confederation, The huge government that included hundreds of planets and dozens of species, the humans looked completely confused. Jin shook her head and shrugged, showing they had never heard of it. How is that possible? The Confederation controlled most of the known galaxy. They had laws, trade routes, communication networks, and military fleets everywhere. Yet these humans had somehow developed space travel completely on their own, with no help or contact from anyone. Jin showed him more pictures of their journey. Their ship, the Perseverance, was on a mission to explore the outer edges of the galaxy and look for other intelligent life. They had been traveling for months, mapping empty star systems and searching for any signs of civilization. Then Jin drew something that made Kethvar's heart skip a beat. She showed their ship detecting his distress signal from 3 entire star systems away. That was an incredible distance. Most ships wouldn't even pick up emergency signals from that far. But here was the amazing part. As soon as they heard his call for help, they immediately changed course to find him. They didn't debate about it or check with headquarters. They didn't worry about the danger of entering unknown space or the risk to their own mission. They just came. Jin worked hard to explain something important to him using their limited shared vocabulary. She kept pointing to her crew and saying "no leave behind" over and over. Finally, she managed to get the message across in broken but understandable words. "We leave no one behind. This is human way." Kethvar realized she was talking about some kind of ancient code that humans lived by. Even though they were a young species with primitive technology, they followed an old rule that said any spacefarer in trouble must be helped, no matter what the cost. This wasn't just their job or their orders. This was who they were as people. The idea of leaving someone to die alone in space was so horrible to them that they couldn't even consider it. Chief Park noticed Kethvar's confusion and tried to explain further. Through gestures and simple words, he showed that humans believed space was dangerous enough without people abandoning each other. "Space big, scary," he said in his broken attempt at Kethvar's language. "But together, we strong." Dr. Kim nodded and added her own broken words. "Help others, others help you, circle of life in stars." Kethvar felt tears forming in his eyes. These humans had risked everything to save a complete stranger from a species they had never met. They had no idea who he was or whether he was worth saving. They just knew he needed help, and that was enough. Over the next 2 days, something amazing happened. The humans didn't just fix Kethvar's ship, they made it better than it had ever been before. Chief Park and his team worked around the clock, installing improvements that seemed impossible, but somehow worked perfectly. Park showed Kethvar how they were adding what he called backup systems for the backup systems. Every critical component now had 2 or 3 alternatives ready to kick in if the main one failed. When Kethvar asked why through their improving sign language, Park smiled and said in his broken Valerian, "1 break, you die. 2 break, maybe. Okay, 3 break, very unlucky day." The human approach was completely different from advanced galactic engineering. Instead of making perfect systems that rarely failed, they assumed everything would eventually break and planned for it. They built their technology to be tough, fixable, and replaceable. Dr. Kim solved Kethvar's food problem in a way that surprised everyone. She had been studying his blood samples and discovered that human emergency rations, the terrible tasting, food bars that sustained their crew on long missions, were actually perfect nutrition for Valerians. The protein structures and mineral content matched his species' needs almost exactly. "Very strange coincidence," Kim said, handing him a food bar that actually tasted good to his alien palate. "Maybe Universe wants us to be friends." But the cooperation wasn't one-sided. Kethvar had decades of space travel experience and knowledge that the humans desperately needed. He pulled up his ship's star charts and showed them the real dangers of the galaxy that weren't in any official records. He spent hours explaining the Kepler Nebula disaster, using drawings and simple words to warn them about the radiation storms that had killed his crew. "Government lies," he told them, pointing to the official safe routes. "This way kills. Many ships die here." Commander Jin's face grew serious as she understood the implications. These weren't just navigation hazards. They were cover-ups that had cost hundreds of lives. She made sure her crew recorded everything HFY told them about the dangerous routes. HFY also taught them Valarian navigation techniques that were thousands of years old. These methods didn't rely on fancy computers or satellite networks. Instead, they used the natural patterns of stars and cosmic radiation to find safe paths through space. "Your human computer's good," HFY explained to Park, "but stars better. Stars never lie, never break, never need repair." Park was fascinated by these ancient techniques. He watched carefully as HFY showed him how to read the subtle signs that indicated safe passage through dangerous regions. "We learn to fly between stars," Park said thoughtfully, "but you learn to live with them." The most touching moment came when the humans shared their personal emergency supplies with him. Dr. Kim gave him her own medical kit, fully stocked with medicines. Chief Park installed a small backup power generator that came from their personal quarters. Even Commander Jin contributed, giving him detailed maps of safe harbors and friendly ports along the outer rim. "Why give so much?" HFY asked them through their shared vocabulary. Jin's answer was simple but powerful. "Because today you need help. Tomorrow, maybe we need help. Space Family takes care of Space Family." Working together, they had turned a dying ship into something stronger than either species could have built alone. The time had come to say goodbye. Both ships were fully repaired and restocked, floating side by side in the darkness of space, like two old friends sharing one last conversation before a long journey. HFY stood on his bridge looking through the window at the human ship Perseverance. Just a week ago, he had been preparing to die alone in the cold emptiness of space. Now his ship was running better than ever. His body was healed, and his heart was full of hope for the future. But as he watched the humans preparing to continue their mission, HFY realized something that made his scales tingle with excitement. These people were going to change everything, not just for him, but for the entire galaxy. The Galactic Confederation had grown old and tired. The advanced civilizations had become obsessed with making money and gaining power. They had forgotten the simple truths that every spacefarer used to know: that space was dangerous, that people needed each other to survive, and that helping others wasn't just good business, it was the right thing to do. But humans remembered these truths. Even though they were young and their technology was primitive, they understood what really mattered. They risked their lives for strangers. They shared their food with people they had just met. They fixed broken things not because they had to, but because they could. HFY sat down at his communication station and began recording a new log entry. This one would be very different from his desperate farewell message from weeks ago. Captain's log, day 35 after the storm. "I am no longer the sole survivor of the silent current. I have been rescued by a species called humans from a planet called Earth. This is not a distress call, this is a message of hope." He paused, thinking about how to explain what had happened. "The humans saved my life, but more than that, they reminded me what it means to be alive among the stars. They have no knowledge of our confederation, no understanding of our politics or our trade routes, but they have something we have lost, the memory of why we first reached for the stars." HFY looked out at the Perseverance again, watching the small figures of humans moving around on its hull, making final preparations for departure. "I am returning to Valarian space with evidence of government corruption and criminal negligence that cost the lives of my crew and many others. But I am also bringing news of a new species that will change how we think about civilization itself." The communication panel chimed, indicating an incoming message from the human ship. Commander Jin's face appeared on his screen, smiling warmly. Through their shared vocabulary of simple words and gestures, she delivered a message that would stay with him forever. "Space very big," she said, spreading her arms wide, "but friendship bigger than space. Until we meet again, space brother." HFY felt tears running down his scaled cheeks as he responded. "Until we meet again, space sister." The two ships slowly moved apart, their engines glowing as they prepared to jump to hyperspace. The silent current would carry its precious cargo of hope back to the civilized galaxy, where news of humanity would spread like wildfire through the Confederation. Meanwhile, the Perseverance would continue its mission of exploration, now carrying detailed star charts and a message of friendship to share with whoever they met next. As Kethvar watched the human ship disappear into the stars, he smiled. The galaxy had been quiet for too long. But now, thanks to a species that refused to leave anyone behind, the silence was finally broken. The universe would never be the same.